Hello, everyone. Welcome back to some Oscar film forecasting, where we're going to be doing some Oscar film forecasting for the 2024 Oscar season. Cannes has occurred. We know a little bit more than we did last time. We only really did one video on predictions before. So now we're going to be jumping into Best Picture and Best Director here. We'll also have a separate video for the acting categories and then the tech categories. But right now, jumping into the big picture and director crew. What are your thoughts heading into this discussion, Anthony?
Yes, I think what's going to be fascinating as we go into this conversation is how many epic films can Best Picture support. Because I feel that, we get these sort of big, blockbuster type of, films with a lot of gravity to them, and they're able to stand out because there's not a lot of other films competing in that sort of scale. But, that's why Lord of the Rings is able to do so well in a year that also saw Lost in Translation. But I think you look at this and it's like, first off, Warner Brothers is really, I think, overcommitting in this regard. We have so many films that have such weight of importance on them that is definitely making me excited to see them. I love films that understand how powerful that this art form can be. But as far as distinguishing distinct campaigns, I think they're going to run into a roadblock where, very similar to Netflix in 2019, they're going to have to pick a priority. And I think it'll definitely depend on how well those films do at the box office, because when you have films of this scale, it's very hard for them to be Oscar frontrunners if they kind of flop to the box office. That's why I think The Irishman not really having a box office presence kind of hurt that film compared if it was able to play in theaters. So I think it's definitely interesting. Will a smaller movie like Past Lives with this sort of interest, could that kind of just get up this groundswell of support because they're not taking as much air out of the room and they're not therefore having to prove themselves at every junction of award season? It's something interesting. And then also just recently we found out about the news about the Golden Globes and that the dissolution of the Hollywood Foreign Press, what that maybe means for the Golden Globes if they're being bought by the company that's kind of behind all of the big Hollywood trades like Variety and Deadline. Does that mean now
a bit of a monopoly?
Does it mean that maybe we're going to have two Critics' Choice Awards? Will this maybe the Critics' Choice and this kind of form into one? There's a lot of very interesting things being done with this award season, and a lot of it is going to be revealed in this conversation.
Yes. I think the Golden Globes will probably keep the same voters as the vibe I'm getting, just be under different management this time around. But we shall see. That will be interesting. It'll still be our first awards show this season, so we'll have to see how that goes. But getting into Best Picture, I have a hard time picking a number one, as we say every time we predict Best Picture here. Looking at like the past 2 decades of trends, if you're going to pick someone in Best Picture, it should be a film from a director who has never been nominated in Best Picture before. And there are only really 2 options here for winners for that, I think. So I'm going to still stick with The Color Purple as my winner. I think it'll win SAG Ensemble, and a lot of our recent Best Picture winners won SAG Ensemble. I think it'll get a lot of acting nominations. I think it'll get a good amount of tech nominations. And I think it could probably win in acting category too. And I think it could get into director. I saw Blitz Bazzoul's previous film, and it was very well directed. So that's what I'm sticking with for now. He's a newish director. He did music videos and then The Burial of Kojo, a smaller, more indie film, but he fits the mold of the director who has never been in Best Picture before, and then they end up winning Best Picture. So I'm going with that for now. Not super confident in it, but I don't really see any other options.
So having seen this show on Broadway, I saw the most recent revival of it with Cynthia Erivo. It's definitely a very soulful piece, and I actually had the fortunate opportunity to see its closing performance, where like Cynthia Erivo had to like tell the audience to like be quiet or we're never going to get through the song. Like people just lose their mind. So if that sort of energy can translate to the film, especially with the holiday release, I could see a world where Color Purple does very well. I think all the categories that you talked about are possibilities for it to show up. I think especially there could be this sort of movement in Best Actress, kind of similar to what we saw with Chloe Zhao and then Jane Campion winning back to back, and sort of this resurgence of the female director in that category. We could see the resurgence of the woman of color and Best Actress following Michelle Yeoh. Um, and it could be this sort of rectification for Whoopi Goldberg not winning in for the original film that Steven Spielberg directed when she lost. I think Geraldine Page finally won on her 8th nomination that year, which is what kind of stopped Whoopi Goldberg, who of course went on to win for Ghost and supporting actress. But I could see a world where like Fantasia kind of gets this sort of support because of that, and the history of this film with the Oscars not having won any of its 10 nominations originally. So I definitely think it's a contender, but as I said, I think Warner Brothers is going to have to pick a priority because we have Dune Part 2, we have Barbie, we have a lot of films. I mean, we haven't really, I mean, I don't know, I don't think, I'm kind of surprised that Wonka is coming out so close to the release of The Color Purple, because I feel like, they're both musicals.
They also
So
release Aquaman that same month too, so they're kind of
yeah, so it's a
doing
lot. So
there.
I worry about Color Purple just because it's not as IP known as those other ones. It is it's a well-known property and a popular book, I'm sure, among many high school English classrooms. But I worry that if it doesn't do well, which sometimes musicals aren't, I mean, just look at The Little Mermaid, not really performing well overseas. I worry about if this type of musical doesn't perform well at the box office, will it get swamped by even other Warner Brothers movies, let alone other Oscar contenders?
Yeah, I do think if there will be a musical hit that December, it will probably be Wonka. I think that has probably more wide appeal. But I still think Color Purple, I mean, I don't know how big the budget is, but could probably still make a decent amount of money. But yeah, I also hope it hits a festival or two beforehand. Those late December releases aren't really working out lately for Oscar movies. So hopefully it hits, I don't know, AFI Festival, TIFF, something.
Well, the other thing
But yeah.
too with Warner Brothers is that they often like to straddle the line between box office like entertainment and indie festival darling. We saw this with A Star Is Born, we saw this with Joker, and it sometimes works for them because they're able to kind of straddle both lanes, and it doesn't really feel attached to one or the other. So it's harder to define the film because I feel like when you get into one lane very clearly, then you can be put in sort of a box, and there are films that you can compare it to. One of the reasons why I think Everything Everywhere All at Once did so well is because nobody really could define it as a previous Oscar contender. So that originality in its campaign and its trajectory, I think, propelled it to its Oscar record-breaking wins. So they do that very well with Warner Brothers films, and this could be another one that kind of straddles that line. So I am intrigued of how they play this because I think the trailer didn't get as much buzz as we maybe were intending it to. And maybe that's because of the expectation that some people like you are thinking this is maybe one of the top contenders, and maybe like it already has that weight to carry, which Talk to a Star Is Born or La La Land, it's not a great weight
It
to
could
have.
disappoint. Yeah.
So we'll see. I think a lot about Color Purple will be riding on Barbie in the next month. When Barbie lands and we get some eyes on it, we see what Warner Brothers is intending, because that's another film that it could do very well in screenplay, could do very well in the text like costume and production design, and it could do well in the acting. So once we see that kind of land and where that's kind of going to be positioned, I think we'll have a better opinion of where Color Purple will be standing alongside that film.
Yeah, I agree. So then my number 2 is the other movie that I think could probably win, fitting those standards that I said before. Past Lives from director Celine Song, her directorial debut, so I'm sure she'll be winning all of those first debut feature film awards. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I wish I could. Still not playing near me, but the reactions from it, people are having very emotional reactions to it. It's clearly eliciting an emotional response, which is what you look for in recent Best Picture winners. I think The Color Purple will probably also do that, but I think this one is especially strong. A24 seems to have already indicated it will be their award season priority, but we'll get into one of their other priorities this year, as they've struggled to get 2 films into Best Picture. But I think this will get some acting plays. Celine Song could get into director. We'll talk about that in a second. And a screenplay, I probably win screenplay, which is if you're also looking for a Best Picture winner, they often win screenplay too. So you should look at the two screenplay categories to see who's going to win in those categories. I think those films usually have a better shot at winning. And I think Past Lives has a very good shot at winning original screenplay. So I think could potentially win. My only worry is it's an early June release. It's doing well in limited release, but it's not like killing it. It's giving kind of Farewell vibes. Like Farewell, released in the summer, did very well at the box office. Didn't like do record-breaking limited release per theater numbers like Asteroid City just did. So I think it could potentially, since it's not killing it at the box office, lose some buzz. But I also think A24 will keep it in the consciousness. I think A24 struggled in 2019 having a priority. I think they weren't quite sure what to do. I think this year they know that this is a big deal for award season. But I do worry about losing some buzz and it being maybe a little too small scope to win, like too small scale to win Best Picture. But we shall see.
I think the other thing that hurt A24 in 2019, because I do think the Farewell comp is it's a very, what's the word I'm searching for? I see the comp. I think it's a
Yeah.
good, that's a good comparable film. But I think the reason why A24 kind of faltered in 2019 is because Uncut Gems, I think, was what, December 28th was the release date. It was like
Yeah, it
very
was end
late.
of the year.
And so they kind of were like, this could be something, there's a lot of buzz. Adam Sandler's getting a lot of buzz. And so I think the issue is that they really didn't know what they had with Uncut
Yeah.
Gems and what that was going to be their priority until the end of the year. And at that point, because of the shortened season, it was too late. They should have learned their lesson this year, but I do worry, it's not posting the sort of numbers that we need to see for a summer release, an independent summer release to hold on. So, and also like the thing, like Aquafina at least was well known enough that she won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy that year. I don't think that anybody in this cast really has that cachet. So yeah, I worry about the film. I currently have it missing, but I look forward to seeing it, and I hope this sort of film can stick around. But yeah, I think it's coming up short in too many areas for me to think that it'll make it into the top 10.
Oh, interesting. Okay, number three. I'm sure you have this in Best Picture. Killers of the Flower Moon. I think this could potentially win. I mean, everyone's making the comparisons. It's The Fabelmans, it's The Irishman of this year, which could very well happen where it's from a well-known director, it becomes an early frontrunner, gets great reviews. Everyone will say it's our time to finally reward them, like maybe a final time to reward them. But it ends up just getting a bunch of nominations and not really winning anything. That could happen. The buzz from this seems a little stronger than it was for either of those films, at least from Cannes. I mean, as we've seen with other films like Elemental and Indiana Jones, Cannes is a little bit of a bubble. It doesn't really reflect how everyone may react. So we'll see once it hits wide, once everyone gets to see it. But these are some very good reviews for a Scorsese film, especially for the actors. I think it has we'll get a separate video on acting, but we'll talk about that there. I think it has 3 acting nominations pretty much locked, and it could win in any of those potentially. And I think it'll get a bunch of texts. And with the screenplay thing, if you look at adapted screenplay, I think adapted screenplay, there's a lot of good nominee potential. Winner-wise, Killers of the Flower Moon just kind of makes the most sense to me, either that or Oppenheimer. So I think if it wins a screenplay category, then that does obviously make it stronger in picture.
Yeah.
So I think it could.
I picked up the book, and the book is riveting.
Oh, nice.
So it's a fantastic story that I think we've already seen people think Scorsese did a great job with. And as we've said before, for a kind of name director to win Best Picture, it has to be seen and perceived as one of the best films of their career. That's the issue with The Fabelmans, that it just, for a lot of people, myself disincluded, I thought it did, but for a lot of people, it just couldn't compare with the Schindler's List, with the Saving Private Ryans, with the E.T.s and the Raiders and the Jaws of Spielberg's filmography. But this seems to be many people saying this is maybe his best film of the 2000s, maybe going as far back as his Best Picture winning The Departed. I think people are saying it's better than The Wolf of Wall Street. So that's good. You know, if it can get the sort of headlines that this is the best Scorsese since Goodfellas, and I think you'll probably see a bunch of think pieces say that when the movie finally hits a wide release, that sort of momentum could build for this movie, especially with the text, especially with the acting. With if it can win that screenplay award, which I agree is probably very likely for this film, probably the most likely win for the film. So
Mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think this is a rung above your Irishmans and your Fablemans. Um, we'll see. I think it really depends on the rest of the crop. You know, that's what's going to come down to is there something more exciting? It's the La La Land thing, where La La Land, if it comes out any other year, maybe it does win. But when you put it up against Moonlight, which is this sort of like this kind of shaking up the audience and showing the future of what cinema could be compared to something that's a little bit more nostalgic, then that's why I think Moonlight was able to kind of exceed La La Land when all was said and done. So if there's something
Yeah.
that's more exciting, that's pushing us forward, something like Everything Everywhere, then you know, Killers of the Flower Moon could fall. But if there's not that type of movie, then it could just do very well because of that.
Yeah. Also worth mentioning, Apple, who's new to the award season campaigning game, pretty much won on their first try. And it seems like they're very committed to this, and they'll have an endless amount of money to throw towards it. So I think that will also help it in terms of awareness and potentially winning. Number four, this will be our tech juggernaut this year, Dune Part 2, another Warner Brothers film. Yeah, it'll get nominated in pretty much every tech category. Hopefully it gets in director. We'll talk about that in a second, but yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much doubt that this will end up in pretty much all the techs and then therefore picture. I don't really have much else to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a film, you know, it's it's either going to cement itself as Lord of the Rings, and it's sort of no matter if this is the last movie, if there's going to be another one, whatever it is it this type of movie that always gets in, or is it going to be more of a Star Wars, where like the first one gets in because it's seen as this groundbreaking achievement, but then the sequels don't materialize that same way? I still think the jury's out. We have to see. The trailer looks amazing, but I think the thing that helps the sort of sequels that always get in is either there's something completely new to this installment, like we saw with Avatar, where the water effects are completely original to that film, had nothing to do with what the first film was achieving, and therefore there was a renewed reason to award that film with a nomination. Or if it's just part of this consistent vision. So Dune, I feel like would definitely be part of that second group.
Yeah,
um,
probably.
so let's see what happens. You know, I think it looks wonderful, but again, as I've said, Warner Brothers has a lot of priorities, and we've already seen that despite 6 award wins for the first one, Denis Villeneuve did not get in there for director. So he would have to pull a George Miller type scenario where he would have to get nominated for director for the sequel for the first time. You know, so
Yeah.
it's I don't know. I think for me, Doom Part 2 would be like in my bottom five. I'm so confident in it getting in there, but I'm not as like, oh, that's for sure getting in, because we've been down this road before. Sometimes, you know, Dune has shown a little bit of missteps along the way, despite, you know, 6 wins originally. But I also don't know if it might be a Black Panther situation where like it gets some nominations, not as much as the original, and it's just like what are we awarding that's fresh this time? Again, questions that we'll have to wait to see the movie itself and see what is new. You know, we're seeing a lot of different, you know, territories and families and stuff. So, you
Mhm.
know, the Austin Butler people and their black and whiteness might bring enough
Might help.
freshness to this. So we'll see.
Yeah, I do think just from an academy perspective, I think Denis is a much more respected filmmaker than any of the Marvel fare. I think
Oh
it'll
yeah.
also be a more complete story than most of the Marvel fare is considered with Black Panther 2. So I think it'll still get in. I don't think it'll be, I think it'll win probably some tech categories, but that'll probably be it. But I'm pretty confident that'll end up in picture at the end of the day.
I would just because I'm thinking about this, like the fact that Avatar was able to get into Best Picture with only 3 other nominations, which I
Yeah.
think was what visual effects, which it won,
Hmm.
sound and
Yeah.
production design.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it does that, if it achieves that, if it's not this sort of 13 years in the making, $2 billion hit. I don't think there's a world where Dune Part 2 makes $1 billion, let alone
Oh,
$2
no.
billion. So like I just wonder what's the rush? Avatar, at least it came in at the end of the year and people were mesmerized. It made $2 billion. And also, it had been 13 years since we had one of these. So the fact that
Mhm.
Dune Part One came out 2 years ago, like that's where I'm just trying to just like, what does this film have that the original didn't, so that it reignites everybody's love? Maybe people seeing it on the big screen for the first time. Maybe a lot of these voters saw it on a screener because we were still in like the end days of the pandemic. Maybe that could end up helping it.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just because a lot of these other movies, I'm like, you look at Barbie, you look at Oppenheimer, you look at Killers of the Flower Moon. These are a lot of films where it's filmmakers and the film they seem so singular. Like I've never seen that from them or any film. Where Dune Part Two seems a follow up in the same regard to what we all loved about the first one, and that's where I'm just trying to like, what's distinct, what's going to be the thing that really
I
cements this.
I don't think it
So
needs to necessarily be super different to still get in there because I think they clearly liked the first one, and if they like this one just as much, I think they might just still vote for it, even if it's not like something completely different, if they still
very
enjoy it.
possible.
Yeah. But number five, Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's 3 hour R-rated epic releasing in like 2 or 3 weeks here. Um, yeah, that'll be interesting going up against another film. Yeah, I'm pretty confident in this. I think it's Universal's really only awards contender this entire year, so they'll have all their priorities on this film.
Nothing from
Um,
Focus.
oh yeah, they do have one thing from Focus. They have
Okay.
holdovers, so I guess it's the main
Yeah.
Universal Studios Focus this year.
Which
Uh,
they don't tend to be major. I feel like
no, they're not Warner Brothers
Universal,
or
like the main Universal
Fox.
isn't the main.
No,
I
they're
think
not.
that's one of the reasons I think they were willing to make all these accommodations for Nolan to come over,
Yeah,
because they were like, this could get us into this arena somewhere
yeah,
we haven't usually been.
yeah. But I think just like Dune, it'll get a good amount of tech categories. Beyond that, I think unlike Dune, it'll get an acting, probably at least one acting category, screenplay. I don't know box office wise what it'll do because I think it might end up losing money, but I think it might just be close enough that it like maybe breaks even, but I don't think it's going to be a huge hit. But I still think this is the most awards fair-y thing that Christopher Nolan has done. The only thing that's close to it is Dunkirk, which did get in Best Picture and Director and a bunch of techs. So I think, and it's a biopic. I think, and everyone in the cast is raving about it. Of course they are, but uh, yeah, I feel pretty confident that this will get in there.
Yeah, I'm more than pretty confident. I currently have this in my top five. It's very difficult for me to pick a number one at this point, but I feel like
Hmm.
if I had to, this would maybe be it, just because I think this is checking off enough boxes for me. I think that the fact that Christopher Nolan he's only been nominated for Best Director once, and he's only had two movies of his get into Best Picture, Inception and Dunkirk. I feel like he's existing in this sort of Martin Scorsese level of like, he's seen as this wildly respected figure, but he's never had that Oscar moment. So this could be his Departed. If the movie really delivers, I think that technically, of course, we're expecting this to be a major contender. If he can get the emotional, which we've heard rumors that people are left devastated by the end of the movie. It's definitely a devastating story.
I don't know if it's emotionally devastated or if it's
Yeah.
just like this is what our world is devastated.
So we'll see what happens. I think that I am definitely looking forward to it. I think that I will be interested to see how this film operates right next to Killers of the Flower Moon, because I feel like they're attacking the same sort of voting body and type of
Hmm.
voter. We could be in a
Yeah.
world where it's like we saw with Irishman, Joker, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 1917. Kind of, you could see a similar demographic for those movies, and that's why
Hmm.
Parasite, I think, felt fresh and exciting. Um,
Yeah.
it's still, I'm very optimistic about this. The budget was only 100 million. Um, in the days of major blockbusters,
Now
only
that's low.
100.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, given that Dunkirk, I think, made $500 million or close to it, I think Oppenheimer could probably, I think it will definitely
I think
break
could
even. I don't see
do
it
at
won't.
least like
Yeah.
250, 300 million. So that's
Yeah.
probably good enough.
And the other thing too is, besides, I mean, I think Haunted Mansion comes out the week after, and I think Blue Beetles like end of the summer. But I really think Oppenheimer and Barbie are going to have the opportunity to really just play through the end of
The
July
rest of the
through
summer.
August. So yeah, I think that this could be the type of it's the type of movie that isn't like an IP sort of, light superhero, brand type of thing that actually could get people excited to go to the theater. I know a lot of people who like my parents who just like that's one of the movies that they say we have to go to theaters to see that. I think that's the benefit that Christopher Nolan always has, that people have go out of their way to see it in 70 millimeter IMAX, and the fact that he tends to get people interested in the act of cinema always helps him. And I definitely think Oppenheimer will have a bigger theatrical footprint than Killers of the Flower Moon. So that could be another way that that film kind of cements itself in this race. So I'm optimistic for it. I'm looking forward.
Yeah, yeah, I think it will do pretty well. Number six, I have The Zone of Interest. This is the other A24 film that I mentioned. Interesting to note, A24, even last year, has never gotten two films in Best Picture. So we will have to see if they're able to do that this year. I currently have it, but I'm not super confident in them awards campaigning wise. But this was the big debut from Cannes, the obviously best critically receptive. I think it's still at like 98 or something on Metacritic, which is insane. Lots of love for it. I do think it's a film that will play better with a Cannes audience than it will with a general audience. It seems like it's a very slow, melodic, not a ton of plot, but more, I don't know, what a more artsy film that might not appeal to the kind of voters that you mentioned before who may be more interested in a Killers of the Flower Moon or Oppenheimer. But I still
But
think
I could see this as your tar of the year because I think Jonathan
maybe.
Glazer and Todd Fields, very similar type of filmmakers, where they're not making films every year, but when they do, like previously it was like this sort of indie circle, and then maybe because of the footprint that this has, getting into festivals, it's able to garner that support. Now Tar had the benefit of having Kate Blanchett in the center of it and drawing
Yeah.
people in that way. But I don't know. I think that Jonathan Glazer is a respected figure. This could kind of be your Tar slash Triangle of Sadness type of pick as far as this like unconventional movie, festival darling abroad. And I do think that A24 probably has I mean, we'll see. The emotions could help past lives, but I would tend to think this is their better pick. Just because I think this has the chance to probably get in. This, I think the unconventionality of this film probably benefits getting into more places as far as more festivals and more critic circles than Past Lives will. But we'll see. Past Lives could just be that kind of smaller, genuine, emotional kind of indie film that really attacks the heart of the voters. So
Yeah.
they're very different films, at least. So that's good. They're not, cornering the same
Yeah, very
awards
different. Yeah.
market.
I do think the vibe I got is people weren't leaving the zone of interest very emotionally affected. They were more impressed by it. I think people are leaving Past Lives very emotionally affected, which I think makes it, in my opinion, at least a little bit stronger. I think this is, as we see every year, there's a foreign film, an international pick in picture, and I think that will end up being this year. So that's that. Number seven, Sight Unseen. Don't really know anything about it besides the cast, the director, and the synopsis a little bit. Saltburn from director Emerald Fennell. I forget. I believe this is MGM/Amazon, so we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, this is her sophomore attempt, so those are always interesting, as we saw with The Sun last year. But I think this will be more successful. There have been some audience test screenings, not to completely rely on them, but they have gone very well, is what I've heard. And it just I've heard very good things. It's got a good cast, it's got a good premise. I trust Emerald Fennell. I think she's going to deliver. And I think this will probably be Amazon's biggest push. I'm sorry, everyone who thinks Air is a big contender. I do not think it is. And Amazon's got some money to spend. Not that they're in Best Picture every year, like some people like Searchlight and Warner Brothers are, but I think that I think this will get good reviews, and I think they'll push for it. So I think it's got a shot. I'm keeping it in there.
Yeah, at least for now. And now we're sort of like we're just throwing darts at the wall.
Mysteries.
And if there's
Yeah.
one like attribute about the film that's okay, I could see a trajectory. We'll see. I'm always worried with returning Oscar female filmmakers because I feel like they don't receive the sort of cushion that the male filmmakers do. You know, the fact that, you know, Catherine Bigelow and Greta Gerwig, like they both could have been nominated a second time,
Yeah.
and for Zero Dark 30 and Little Women, and they weren't. So I
Their
feel like
film
some
still got in picture though.
Little Women got a picture, but as far as like whenever I hear somebody say this female filmmaker did well the first time, this is their second film, I always get a little trepidatious because I'm like Little Women. I feel like was probably in that 7 to 9 range of its best picture.
Probably.
Like, so that's I'm always worried. I'm always worried. I look forward to Saltburn, but I also think Emerald Fennell, like Promising Young Woman, I wonder if it does manage to get in. I mean, it did win the screenplay category, but I feel like it could just have been the COVID year because I do think that type of film was so unconventional and just I would not have aligned that with the Academy taste if I was doing a Venn diagram. So that's always the worry with that type, her type of filmography. You know, she's a very exciting filmmaker, but sometimes that could turn people off. So we'll see what happens when we hear
Yeah.
more about
Love
it.
to
But
get a better look at it.
yeah.
Number 8, we have gotten a little bit of a look at this. Poor Things. Like I said, Fox Searchlight usually gets something in there pretty much every year. I mean, they even got Nightmare Alley in when we weren't expecting it. And I think this could be similar. Based on the trailer, I think this will probably get some tech categories. It looks very, very, very well made. Yorgos doesn't really always appeal to the Academy. The Favorite's really his only. I mean, he's gotten some films in the screenplay categories, but The Favorite's only his like the only big contender he's had. But this has a really good cast: Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Mark Ruffalo, Rami Youssef, Gerard Carmichael. I believe. That's all I can remember. But yeah, interesting premise. Apparently Emma Stone has her character dies and then has an infant's brain put in her brain, so she behaves like an infant. So Willem Dafoe is playing like a Frankenstein-esque or
Total
Dr.
Oscar bait, if
Frankenstein-esque
you ask
character.
me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it'll be a fun performance from Emma Stone. But yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at what Searchlight has, it's this, Next Goal Wins, or Strangers. And I think Strangers is possible. I think that could hit some festivals and maybe get good reviews, but I'm not Andrew Hayes not as consistent enough, at least compared to Yorgos, that I'm not willing to do that. I think Poor Things, it's announced it will hit Venice. There's usually at least one big contender that comes out of Venice, and then that's the only one I can really see in the lineup, unless Ferrari becomes sort of big contender, which I don't think it will, but I guess we'll see. So I think this will probably be our main Venice contender. So
I
yeah,
think what helps Poor Things the most is Emma Stone and
yeah,
her credibility that she brings to the project. And of course, the last time she teamed up with Yorgos, it was The
it
Favorite.
did go
So
well.
we'll see what happens. You know, this could maybe get some texts. It could just be so weird that people are just into it, but it could be so weird that people are turned away from it. You know, I could see this being another favorite, but I could also seeing it be Beau is Afraid Part 2. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that as well. Number 9, my 9 and 10 is where I am throwing my Netflix darts at the wall. So number 9, I have May December, who
Yeah.
Netflix picked it up for the US. I mean, debuted at Cannes, very good reviews. I think we're looking at probably at least probably 2 or 3 acting categories, and with Portman Moore and Charles Melton, I think we'll probably get a screenplay nomination. I think when you get all of those together, that's a pretty good package for Best Picture. The only thing, I guess, the tone is a little campy, but I don't think that should necessarily, if it's a well-made film, as we have seen from the reviews, I don't think that will necessarily deter people from voting for it, as we see with all these other types of films. This kind of stands out as different from the rest of them, unless Saltburn is
Especially
very
since
campy.
Barbie is one of the films in this sort of block, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
probably going to
I think
define
this,
camp for the next couple of years.
yeah, I think this looks a little more like Oscar fair than at least Barbie does to me. So I think this could probably get in, but I'm not extremely confident.
I hope it does. I love everybody in this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, but the Ghost of Carol, man,
But in a year
every
of 10,
time
Carol would have gotten it.
you say that, and I tend to agree, but still,
Carol
it
and
didn't
Star
when
Wars,
all was said
probably.
and done. So I've always been worried that Todd Haynes is a bridesmaid and never a bride when it comes to this sort of awards season prognosticating. But I'm optimistic. I cannot wait for this film, and I hope it gets in.
I think, well, I'm pretty optimistic about it. And then at number 10, I have Naiad, which is another Netflix release starring Annette Bening and Jodie Foster, directed by the duo who directed Free Solo, which won Best Documentary a few years ago. Very well directed. Annette Bening is pretty much a swimmer who has to swim a super long distance, like coast to coast or something, I think. She's older, so she has to get back in the game and start training. Jodie Foster is her trainer and best friend, I believe. It has Claudio Mirando, I believe, as our cinematographer, who is very well, does very good cinematography. So this is kind of super far out. I'm just taking a risk here because none of these other ones are super risky. But I don't know. I'm going to go with Naiad because no one else seems to be doing it. So why not take that risk right now? And yeah, it could hit some festivals too, as we don't have a ton of fall festival releases here. So I think it could also be that. And then honorable mentions for Best Picture, movies that I think could get in, but close, almost there. Bob Marley, One Love. They do love their biopics. This is Paramount. I do worry about the late December release. Could be like Respect or something of that sort. We'll have to see what it is quality-wise, but I think Kingsley Ben-Adir and Lashana Lynch, as we will get into in our acting predictions.
December release?
It has a December release, yeah.
So do you mean Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody? Because Respect was an August release.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I do mean Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody. Yeah, you are right.
Still think that was the title.
It was. God, Bob Marley, One Love. I guess that's what they're all going to be now. Holdovers is another honorable mention. This is Focus's biggest contender. I think they're probably their best shot. And Focus is usually pretty good at campaigning and gets a few things in most years, at least one thing in most years. Interesting premise. Paul Giamatti and Divine Joy Randolph. Possible. I don't have it in right now just because of the Alexander Payne stuff, which I think could become an issue for it.
Hit or miss.
Yeah, he's also got
you
some
could have
controversy.
Another Nebraska. It could be another downsizing. You never know.
Yeah, he's got some controversy around him too that might hurt it. As I mentioned before, Strangers. This is, I think, Searchlight's other big contender. Paul Mescal and his Oscar nomination after Glow, Claire Foy, Andrew Hay writing it. It's interesting premise. Pretty much this young author like visits his home and he sees his dead parents or something. I don't know. It's interesting. Anatomy of a Fall, which is I think Neon's biggest contender. Very good reviews. I'm not sure the whole thing with it is it's like apparently like 50% English, 50% I forget what I think French is the other language. So it might be eligible for international, it might not, but either way, as we'll get into, Sandra Hüller seems to be a big contender for Best Actress. She seems to be giving a Tar level performance, as people say. So who knows? Could get in like screenplay, actress, and then maybe a picture. Who knows?
She would
Maestro.
have to be a name. Unfortunately, I feel Isabelle Huppert was the rare exception where you are not known to American audiences and you're able to sneak in. So I always hope for the possibility, but I feel like for you to have a Tar level performance doesn't really help you unless you are Cate Blanchett.
That's sadly true, and as we've seen, the acting branch is the least likely to be receptive to foreign films, it seems, and foreign performances.
Where was Nina Hoss for supporting actress?
Yeah, exactly. Maestro, I just haven't heard good things about it. Screening, audience
which does not mean
wise.
it cannot get in. May I remind you?
No, that's true.
Especially with biopics.
That is very fair, but I do think this may be more like a Whale, where it gets makeup, actor, just misses out on picture, but it gets a decent amount of nominations, is what I see it as right now. I also think it won't help to be compared to Tar as another composer film the year after. Then I've got Barbie. We'll have to see. Let's go party. I don't know. I think I'm gonna love it. Personally, I'm very excited for it. I think it'll get a decent amount of tech categories. I think it'll win one or two, like either costume design or production design. I think Gosling, maybe. I don't think Margot Robbie will get in. I don't think Greta Gerwig will get in. And I just do worry about there's a perception, there's a connection to the Barbie brand that there's nothing to really compare to besides maybe the Lego movie, I guess, which wasn't a huge Best Picture contender, but that didn't even get animated feature. But I do think I worry about the old white men in the Academy being like a Barbie movie. I'm not going to vote for a Barbie movie, even if it's great. So we'll have to see. I'm worried about it, but if it's like huge hit, amazing reception, keeps the buzz going, I think it's possible. Right now, I don't have it happening.
Let's, as I said at the top, let's, when this releases, we'll get a lot of things firmed out about this season. This is one of our biggest question marks, and that question mark may draw people in all regards. Box office, awards, it could just be this sort of just perfect cavalcade of like Wonder Woman round two as far as getting people like talking about women empowerment, but it could have the independent sensibilities that Baumbach and Gerwig, of course, have, but it could also have this sort of taking a brand and doing something fresh and exciting, like Joker was able to, surmount their campaign on. I think there's a lot of things that this movie could do, and a lot of like different boosts that it could give its
Yeah,
trajectory in this award season. We have to see what happens.
we do.
So, and it has to make money. I don't think the Barbie movie
I
becomes
think
an
it will.
contender if it doesn't make money. I'm getting more optimistic about it as the day goes on, but I also think
I am too.
I don't think it's been officially rated yet. It's probably going to be PG-13, but
Yeah.
how much I'm really struggling to see if this is like, I don't think this is a family. I don't think you bring
No, it's
children
not.
to pretend to see this. And so it's
This
gonna
is for
really then have to be
yeah.
very, very smart, which I don't doubt it is, but it's gonna have to be really smart in a way that gets people excited. Like it's one thing to be smart, it's another thing to be TikTok popular. And I think they want both,
That's
and
true.
it could be both, but that's the thing. There's so many questions about this movie that like it could be a major contender here, but we have to just see what lane it ends up driving in. What lane does it drive its Barbie mobile? Is that what it's called?
It
The Barbie
does. I don't know. I don't think it's like the Batmobile. I think it's just Barbie's
the
car.
Barbie
But
car. We're gonna find out.
yeah,
See,
we
so many
will.
questions.
We will. We will indeed. And then finally, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which we have seen. I know lots of people think this will get into Best Picture. Uh, the only I know part ones have gotten in before, superhero films have gotten before, even animated films have, but it's the animated part that does make me think probably not. It hasn't happened since Toy Story 3. I think the voters just do separate an animated film from the rest. So I
It's the
sadly don't see it happening.
cliffhanger. I'm telling you, if I think Beyond could maybe do it as sort of this respect for
Yeah,
what the trilogy pulled off. I don't see a world where this cliffhanger ending is able to get people like the thing with other like when you think about other cliffhanger like Two Towers wasn't necessarily a cliffhanger
not as much of a
in that
cliffhanger.
in
No.
that regard. Fellowship was a cliffhanger.
Dune
I
wasn't
think
even as much of a cliffhanger.
when it's so obvious, like it ends with to be continued. Like I don't, and maybe I'm making a bigger deal of it than I should. I just feel like that type of it. People will say it's not a complete story. And we've seen like the fact that Soul couldn't get in despite winning 2 Oscars in a shortened
Yeah,
year because of the pandemic. I just think animation has the hardest time. We talked about like um international talent getting into acting, they have the hardest time. Animation has the
yeah,
hardest time getting into picture. And so
it
you add
does.
that in, you add the Marvel element, which I do think is a factor because if we're going to talk about the one thing that stopped Angela Bassett from winning her supporting actress Oscar, I think Marvel was definitely the reason. I know they're different Marvels, but the Oscar voters don't necessarily know that. They just see Marvel and
Yeah,
a little the same Lego movie, like, I'm not touching that. So unfortunately, I don't think it will play in there. I think your best hopes is maybe it can get another tech thing like Kubo and the Two Strings was able to do.
yeah. That's what I also worry about for a Best Picture package. What it like score is that really like score maybe visual effects, but that's really all I could see outside of animated feature. But yeah, that is it for our picture predictions. Yeah, those are our predictions. We'll have acting categories coming up, screenplay and tech, all that fun stuff. So
And
stick
Emmys,
around for that.
Emmy,
And yes, Emmys
Emmy
are
show
happening
forecast.
soon. Yeah, those are happening soon. So we'll have plenty of coverage of that coming up as well. So Anthony, where can they find you on the internet?
At Anthony_post. You
Awesome.
know where.
You know at this point. But yes, thank you all for watching. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.